Hello again, 122. In this video, I will go over some of the long-term and immediate causes of the First World War, which was the defining event of the 20th century Western world. Overwhelmed by the size of its battles and the extent of its casualties and its impact on all facets of life, contemporaries referred to it simply as the Great War. The Great War was all the more disturbing to Europeans because it came after a period that many believed had been an age of progress. Material prosperity and a fervent belief in scientific and technological advances had convinced many people that the world stood on the verge of creating the utopia that humans had dreamed of for centuries. And the historian Arnold Toynbee expressed what the era before the war had meant to his generation. We had expected that life throughout the world would become more rational, more humane, more democratic, and that slowly but surely political democracy would produce greater social justice. We had also expected that the progress of science and technology would make mankind richer, and that this increasing wealth would gradually spread from a minority to a majority. We had expected that all this would happen peacefully. In fact, we thought that mankind's course was set for an earthly paradise. And that's from Toynbee's book, Surviving the Future, New York Press, 1971, pages 106 through 107. Also, the sinking of the Titanic shook some of this belief in progress as well, which happened just before the First World War. After 1918, it's no longer possible to maintain naive illusions about the progress of Western civilization. So what were these long-range and immediate causes of the World War? Militarism, the alliance system, we'll come back to this map in a moment, imperialism, and nationalism, and internal dissent. In a word, ladies and gentlemen, Maine. That was what long-range causes were. Maine. Conscription, obligatory military service, had been established as a regular practice in most Western countries before 1914. The United States and Britain were major exceptions. European military machines had doubled in size between 1890 and 1914. The Russian army was the largest, but the Japanese proved what that meant. It didn't mean anything. And the French and Germans were not far behind with 900,000 each. The British, Italian, and Austrian armies numbered between 250,000 and 500,000 soldiers. Militarism, however, involved more than just large armies. As the armies grew, so did the influence of military leaders, who drew up vast and complex plans for quickly mobilizing millions of men and enormous quantities of supplies in the event of war. Fearful that changing these plans would cause chaos in the armed forces, military leaders insisted that these plans could not be altered. These are 19th century men, ladies and gentlemen. They are not Democrats. In the crises during the summer of 1914, the general's lack of flexibility forced European political leaders to make decisions for military instead of political reasons. And with that alliance system in place, the chain reaction that will happen will set these alliances against one another. Again, on the one side, before the war, you have Germany, Austria, and Italy, and on the other, France, Britain, and Russia. One more time, take a look at this map. And here we have it, and in between them, you have the neutral countries, which will draw Britain into the war when Germany goes through Belgium, as we'll see. Switzerland is also neutral. The alliance is the reddish or orange color, and the green is the Entente. These are the two big main alliances in Europe in 1914. So, this only added to the tensions, and then there's a series of crises that tested these alliances in the early 1900s. Moroccan crisis and the arguments over the division of Africa and Asia, and that only left European states embittered and eager for revenge. And they're willing to go to war. to preserve the power of their national states. Rivalries over colonies, as I just mentioned, and trade intensified during the age of imperialism. And the military is right there helping to acquire these new overseas markets and these sources of raw materials that can then be brought back and manufactured into finished goods, which could then be taken to those colonies and sold. That was one of the goals of this period. And the growth of nationalism, the last letter in Maine in the 19th century, had yet another serious consequence. Not all ethnic groups had achieved the goal of nationhood. Slavic minorities in the Balkans and the multi-ethnic Habsburg Empire, which is Austria-Hungary, ladies and gentlemen, they still dreamed of creating their own national states. Today, they exist. In the 21st century, there are 7 countries there now in what was Yugoslavia, as we'll see. The Irish dreamed of this, and so did the Poles in the Russian Empire. And it was against this backdrop of mutual distrust and hatred that the events of the summer of 1914 were played out. The assassination of the Austrian Archduke Franz Ferdinand and his wife Sophie on June 28, 1914, the immediate cause of World War I, was carried out by a Bosnian activist who worked for the Black Hand, a Serbian terrorist organization dedicated to the creation of a pan-Slavic kingdom. And also now the Russians will be behind this as well. The Russians view themselves as being the protector of Slavic peoples. And although the Austrian government did not know whether the Serbian government had been directly involved in the Archduke's assassination, it saw an opportunity to render Serbia innocuous or of no consequence once and for all by a display of force. So, some historians have argued that the desire to suppress internal disorder may have been another reason that leaders were willing to take the plunge into war in 1914. And that ends this particular video on the long range and short-term or immediate causes of World War I.